Keep it short as you can. You ready? I'll bring the meeting to order. Commissioner Mary Ellen Barnwell, who's not here with us, for the record, is in between. Oh, I'm sorry. I did you. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
A news release announcing the date, time, and place of the September 21st, 2017 Commission meeting was mailed September 19th, 2017 to appropriate media and other groups or individuals who requested notification. The announcement and agenda were posted at the Department of Disabilities and Special Needs Central Administrative Office, video conference locations, and on the website. The public has been notified that accommodations such as interpreters, mobility assistance, or other assistance will be provided to individuals with disabilities and special needs if requested in advance.
And could you please do the invocation? Commissioner Moreno.
We gather together to make decisions for our community. May we use only our best skills and judgment as we consider the merits and pitfalls of each matter that is placed before us. As we work together on behalf of all whom this organization serves, may we draw strength and encouragement from one another through compassion and reason, with the shared belief that we must treat each other with dignity and respect. May we always act in accordance with what is best for our community and our fellow citizens.
Introduction of guests. I'm going to start in the front and go on the back. So when the last person walks in the room, they still have to introduce themselves.
Bob Jones, Newberry County Board.
Deborah and Heather McPherson, Richland County, and I just want to say that Saturday, Heather will celebrate her 33rd birthday.
Catherine Paget, Family Connection of South Carolina.
Pat Haley, BHDD-OIDD.
Carolyn O'Connell, Advocate, Greenville County.
Amy Down, Fourth Parent Advocate and member of SCDDSN.
Tim Smith for the Greenville News.
Thornwell Simmons, Protection and Advocacy. School Warren, something to do.
Mary Poole, Accessibilities in North County. Sherry Presley, Human Services, Carolina.
Beth Bundy with Bright Start. Angela Rodriguez from South Carolina Spinal Cord Injury Association. Ann Dalton, DDSN. Melody Dodgen, DDSN. Tamara Hammonds, DDSN.
Mike Moss, Calhoun County Disabilities Board.
Williams, Calhoun County DDSN.
David LeGray, Citizen.
Matt LeGray, Incentive Behavioral Health.
Ray Miller, South Carolina Developmental Disabilities Council.
Bill Clarkson, Brain Association, had some with the Magna.
And Joyce Davis with the Brain Injury Association, South Carolina.
Joe White, Cherokee County Disability Specialist.
Jerry Mize, Oconee DSN.
Susan Jones, Lee County DSN. Judy Johnson, Fairfax Central.
Scott Tanner, DHMS.
Dorothy Gizzo, Community Options.
Alan Cornell, Horry County DSN.
Melissa Ritter, DDSN. Morgan Rawls, DDSN. And Philip Pentecostal, DDSN.
Dan Davis, DDSN Office.
Melody Cooper, DDSN.
Pat Warner, BHDD-OIDD. Dexter Alston, BHDD-OIDD. Good morning, Kevin Cody, BHDD-OIDD.
Welcome. Thank you very much. We have the adoption of the agenda, please. There is a motion to postpone agenda item number 15, the State Director's Evaluation Planning Document, until the October Commission meeting. Do I have a motion?
So,
All those in favor?
aye.
And
Approval of the minutes of the August 17, 2017 Commission. A motion?
So moved.
Have a second? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, public input. I just want to tell you, we normally only have 5 people, but today we have 7. So I'm happy to have all 7 of you, but I want you to say it as quickly as you can. Thank you very much. Could I have Matt LeGray, please? Thank you.
I brought some handouts here.
Oh, great.
If you would like to pass. Thank you very much. All right, any
interest of time, I'll just get going.
Go ahead.
Ladies and gentlemen of the commission, fellow attendees taking part in this meeting, thank you for affording me the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Dr. Matt McRae. I am a doctoral level board certified behavior analyst and approved provider of behavior support services, a husband and a father of 2 beautiful boys. To give you a brief history of my professional training and experience, I received my bachelor's degree from Western Michigan University, received my doctorate from the University of Southern Mississippi, which included a predoctoral internship and subsequent completion of 2 years of a postdoctoral fellowship at Kennedy Krieger Institute at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. I began providing services to folks here in South Carolina in 2014, specifically providing behavior support services, or BSS, to individuals with disabilities. During my time working in this field, I have experienced and witnessed a wide variety of outcomes associated with this service. Through the duration of my experience, I have been a frequent solicitor of information from DDSN. Though I have found some help and clarity in these instances, most of my efforts to secure information have been met with ambiguity, circular discussion, and avoidance in providing clear answers to my questions. Due to time constraints, I do not have the ability to go into all my experiences and concerns today, and will only be able to shed partial light on the issues surrounding the topic I will be presenting this morning. However, I greatly look forward to making this meeting a staple in my monthly schedule until the day comes in which I achieve clarity on these issues. Today, I will be talking about the quality assurance process used to assess a provider's compliance with the BSS standards. My QA review started on December 17, 2016. I received the results of my first review on May 16th of 2017. Unfortunately, I did not pass this review, which initiated my immediate exposure to an associated penalty period. I was very perplexed when I received this information, as the documentation I was given and agreed to when starting to provide this service indicated that I would be given an on-site review as part of the QA process. However, this did not happen. Therefore, I had no opportunity to talk with the reviewers about several misconceptions they had when reviewing my work and to clarify information surrounding other areas of concern noted in the review. I later found out that DDSN had covertly removed the on-site review component of the QA review. The removal of this component makes it impossible for a provider like myself to receive due process prior to the implementation of a penalty. I believe this is a violation of my rights as a Medicaid provider. I also later found out that the BSS standards, officially revised in 2014, have been subjected to changes since that date, once again done covertly with no notification or updates given to BSS providers. Both of these issues are very concerning and have been brought to the attention of DDSN. One of the benefits of having an on-site review is that a BSS provider is given the opportunity to ask content-specific questions related to the delivery of their service. This is a major factor in assuring quality, as it provides a collaborative experience in which the BSS provider is given an explanation of the reviewer's interpretation of the standards and allows for discussion related to improving the service. I was robbed of this experience. Instead, I was told the only person I could speak with was a DDSN staff member. Even though I contested the lack of due process, I went ahead and spoke to this individual. Initially, he indicated that he was treating this as an appeal and that he would have to review my materials and get back to me at a later date. Well over a month later, I was afforded the opportunity to speak with him, at which point he indicated to me that, as expected, he did not have clear or any answers to some of my questions. In fact, he agreed with me on at least one major component of my work, with which I had received criticism and deductions from the reviewers. He indicated that if I proceeded with my re-review, I would not have to wait the identified 90-day penalty period to expire, as the process has become much faster. He also indicated that if I were to appeal, I still wouldn't be able to speak with the actual reviewers. This led me to turn down the opportunity to appeal. The information he provided turned out to be false. It has now been 128 days since I received the results of my first review. I have been in the QA process for about 277 days. Every morning I wake up with this on my mind. During the time since I discussed my concerns with the DDSN staff member, I have pushed for clarity and have been given a DDSN response to one of my major questions. The DDSN response that was given directly contradicted what I was told by that staff member. Due to this conflicting information, I have suggested that there may be more items that we had discussed in which I may not have been provided with an answer that aligns with DDSN's response to these questions. I have sought clarity on these issues through multiple communications, but have not had any luck. More importantly, the major content-specific topic I am referencing resulted in a response from DDSN that is clearly against the best practices in my field. I have explained this to them, providing references, and have indicated that changing my services to reflect what they are indicating would not be in the best interest in the folks I serve. Also, I provided them with references from the literature to back this up. I have not received any response from DDSN related to this topic other than a reference to the wording of the standards, which does not provide any help. This does not include any explanation of why or how my approach in this area does not meet the standard. This is a great example of why due process is an essential component of any review process and how this current process does not strive to place collaboration and true quality assurance as a priority. This experience is not unique to me, as this directly relates to the presentation by Dr. Han Go, which was provided during the Commission's July meeting. There are many other providers that have had similar experiences, which I feel demonstrates that the implementation of the QA process does not hold clinical effectiveness with the utmost importance and fails to provide an opportunity for collaboration and improvement of the service delivery. This is an absolute shame and directly contradicts DDSN's vision statement, which is to provide the very best services to assist all persons with disabilities and their families in South Carolina. Unfortunately, there are many instances of this QA experience I do not have time to cover today. However, I am thankful that I have had the opportunity to shed some light on what providers like myself are being exposed to when they choose to provide PSS to Medicaid recipients.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. We'll give them, have a copy of what you said.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Susan Johns.
Good morning. I'm Susan John, the chairperson for the South Carolina Human Service Providers Association, wishing to share a few thoughts with you today. We have seen some major changes in multiple policies and practices over the last few months, as well as significant systematic changes coming prior to the end of this calendar year. We have appreciated the opportunity that we've been offered to weigh in on some of the policies, and we believe the final product on policy will be beneficial to the entire state in some of these efforts. Some of the changes I wanted to make note of are, one, a major overhaul to the critical incident policy and determining acceptable protocols to the general events reporting module in THERAP. The timeline for full implementation for this change is November 1 of 2017. Significant changes also in the residential standards as it relates to behavior support services and the complete handoff of the responsibility to the provider. This includes hiring, firing, assuring compliance with all standards, quality assurance reviews, determining whether to hire or contract with the behavior support provider, as well as to complete fiscal responsibility and payment of services. The timeline for a soft start implementation is October 1 of 2017, with full compliance as of January 1 of 2018. The third major change is that all the changes that have been transpiring in relationship to case management, including the eligibility determination and the intake process, conflict-free case management issues, plan reviews by central office staff prior to implementation, and finally, the need to pull forward and complete all annual plans that are due prior to January 5th of 2018 that have to be done by October 20th, 2017 in order to give them that 60-day window. This forces case managers to be working on January 2018 plans in November of 2017 in preparation for this deadline. That's a large burden that's placed on case management. The fourth thing is sanctions for repeat internal audit findings. The timeline for full implementation was July 1 of 2017. The fifth large item was that there were licensing reviews and compliance reviews that are now without notice. The timeline for the full implementation of that was July 1 of 2017. The sixth large thing was the amount of directives that have filtered out to providers with changes. The sheer number of directives that are sent out each month that have been revised, some requiring feedback, others requiring close scrutiny, thus pulling providers away from their day-to-day function to review policies that may have significant direct impacts as well as financial penalties going forward. Over the last 2 months, there's been 8 directive changes that have required review and input, and potentially changes in the local policies to reflect those changes that are done at the state level. The seventh large thing that's happened is a complete relook at the financial management piece of the statewide system and the potential overhaul of how providers are being paid and may be paid in the future. This is currently in process and no official timeline for implementation has been discussed. All of these changes are huge and impact the entire DDSN system. Some providers are further along in the process of implementing it thereat. Per recent meetings, 30 private providers in the state have been using the GER module within the TheraP system. This represents that a little less than half of the providers are prepared and trained to some degree in the basic use of the GER system, not to include the recent changes to the critical incident and the GER protocols that were just released. What this means to providers is the need to complete or in part train their staff on the basics of the GER module and the critical process, assuring that staff are confident and capable of performing the functions. Take these things into the same scenario and apply the changes in the residential standards that are now encompassing the behavior support services with the full implementation timeline of January 1, 2018. Assuring that the behavior support staff meets all of the hiring requirements, is knowledgeable of the standards, the responsibilities in meeting those standards, and assuring that the quality assurance director or a person within each agency is prepared to adequately monitor the behavior support plans per the new standards, and the fiscal agents within each organization are prepared financially to pay the individuals their compensation based on the arrangement. Compound this with the fact that training for the changes isn't happening until the end of September here, with the full implementation, the soft start beginning October 2017, but the full implementation of January 1st, 2018. What people need to know is that all these things take time, it takes training, and it takes resources out of each organization. If you look at every major change that I've outlined, the three recurring components are: there seems to be an inadequate timeline for implementation, an inadequate amount of time given to each provider to assure training of staff is adequate, and that each provider can assure their own systems and their own organizations are in place. And thirdly, inadequate financial resources to address all the changes. As the old saying goes, time is money. And this is never so true with the unprecedented changes taking place within the DDSN system. Time to assure staff training, time to assure all processes are in place, the quality assurance process is in place and ready for additional oversight, time to assure financial resources. What is truly happening is that the system is overloaded and the providers are feeling enormously overwhelmed by all of the changes. It's extremely important that the commission and the DDSN staff truly recognize that with each change, providers need adequate opportunity to assure that the operations are in order. 1 month or even 2 months of notice isn't always enough. Many of the changes affect the entire organization. So if the executive management staff is feeling overwhelmed, can you imagine what a house manager, what a director of residential, what a director of day supports feels? As we move forward, we're asking for the following. Please push back the implementation timeline on several of these items to January of 2018 at a minimum. Number two, provide adequate time to plan and implement. This would be a 5 to 6 month advanced planning if we were to really want it done correctly. Number three, provide training well in advance of actual implementation deadlines to allow providers the opportunity to implement and ask all of their questions and have an opportunity to make mistakes and implement changes when mistakes are made. And lastly, to delay compliance with the continuous quality improvement process for at least 6 months following the actual deadline of implementation. This would allow each provider, again, an opportunity to work out the kinks in their implementation plans. Thank you. The system can only work if we make it work together.
Thank you very much. Judy Johnson? I'm sorry about our time.
This copy.
Morning. Hopefully you know what I'm about to talk about. It's that kind of email that I sent each and every one of you yesterday. I've written a script, but I heard that thing going off and I'm going to go right. Okay. Bottom line is we need help. We as providers are still continue to have a difficult time recruiting and retaining direct support professionals. Your legislative committee met last week and they looked at a possibility of allowing us to hire folks during that process if they didn't have all of their FBI, if they didn't have like their FBI checks done. We can get their criminal background checks from SLED very quickly. That's not the issue. The issue is those federal FBI checks and the DSS checks. Making a direct support staff that only works or gets paid $11 an hour up to 7 weeks before they're going to get paid is simply impossible for us to be able to hire folks. as much as and as often as we need to do. We're asking you to please relook at that item, and in the report, it's law number 6 on page 14 of the report. Many providers in the state ask DDSN to ask you to please allow us to do that. I'm going to end with a quote. Told you I'd be quick. Change the way you look at things, and the things you look at change. Please help.
Thank you very much. Carolyn O'Connell.
Good morning, commissioners, and Beverly, I hope you enjoyed your vacation. And I was really proud to hear that you think your staff is so wonderful that you didn't need to be here in such a potential emergency. Only the hugest hurricane that we've had, God knows when, that was scheduled to hit Charleston and come all the way up through Greenville to the mountains. I would like to mention that we've had some changes made in Greenville County and that our executive director was terminated, which, you know, I don't agree with a lot of things, and I don't agree with that, but that's the board's right to do this. But the one thing that I do want to ask is I want to FOIA the audit that surrounded these changes, and they say he wasn't fired because of the audit. But you know, they both happened at the same meeting, and I've been through this before with Brent Park. At the time, I went to Lois Park Mall, and I requested to get a copy of an audit that was done post the changes. I contacted her for 3 years requesting that my FOIA be honored. It never was. I got mad, but I was being stonewalled, and at the time I really did not know where to go with this complaint. I do know now and been updated on FOIA laws, and what I'm going to FOIA is I'm going to want the original audit. I don't want to see an audit like we had in Greenville County when it was given by the gentleman that does the annual audit. That audit was sanitized. Everything that was in it that people needed to know, it went away. And I don't want the sanitized audit. I want to hear the auditor's initial thoughts. And from what I understand, this is something now, according to the new FOIA rules, that we can ask for. So if you don't agree with me, I ask you to go check that this is the rules, and we've got this from a very reliable source. Generators. Why do we have money sitting for generators when we've got people in fragile homes, fragile people in homes that will be potentially left with no electricity? And in this state, we've had different times. We've had people without electricity for as long as a month, going back to Hugo. Now, I wonder if anyone here has asked the staff to furnish a list of the houses under our organization and let them tell you how many houses really have generators. And the $600,000 that's still sitting on the books, how many generators would that buy? I mean, I don't know any of these answers, and there very well could be a good reason for this to be happening. But if it was me, commissioners, I would want to know. I just want to ask deeper, dig deeper for answers. I want to also comment on the different changes to laws that have been recommended. And I really question all the changes that are coming that take the families and push them out the door, take them out of the decision process. We're supposed to be living with the final rule, which final rule gets quoted a lot of times for things that final rule doesn't even cover, okay? The final rule is looking for the people we serve to be open and out in the world just like everyone else does. And I'm telling you, if I wanted my mama to be part of my care and decisions, I would have a right to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deborah McPherson.
I attended the DDSN Commission Legislative Subcommittee meeting last Thursday, which was to review staff recommendations on any needed legislative changes in statutes and regulations to submit to the House Legislative Oversight Committee. As I sat and listened to the DDSN staff recommendations, I was struck by the consistent attempt of staff to deny parents the right to make healthcare decisions for their adult children with disabilities unable to consent, such as medications, emergency care, and the plan of support, unless they obtain legal guardianship. Commissioner Thompson questioned and expressed her opposition to the proposed staff changes that would remove parents from recommendations 21 and 23. DDSN staff response was that these changes were in keeping with the CMS final rule and that they would need to check with DHHS if the reference to parents were left in these regulation recommendations. I questioned DDSN staff response based on my own personal experience with my daughter's waiver services through CLTC waiver administered by DHHS that allows us to act as our daughter's representative without legal guardianship. I also questioned the DDSN staff response given what I found over the weekend regarding the CMS final rule and the Adult Healthcare Consent Act. On Monday, I placed a call not to DHHS, but to CMS Atlanta office, the horse's mouth, and confirmed that DDSN staff had misinterpreted the intent of the CMS final rule regarding the involvement of parents. If you will recall, the state director told the commission that intake had to be centralized because of the CMS final rule, only to find out later that from CMS that was not the case. The National ARC has published a guide regarding the CMS final rule that states, in quotes, if an individual has a legal guardian, conservator, or other person who has sole authority under state law to make decisions related to the individual's care, the state must comply with the decisions of the legal surrogate. For individuals who do not have legally appointed guardians, the individual's representative is anyone who is authorized to represent the individual for the purpose of making personal or healthcare decisions, either under state law or under policy of the state Medicaid agency, and includes but is not limited to a parent, a family member, or an advocate. I was told by CMS this rule applies to both 1915C and 1915I waivers, and DDSN operates 1915C waivers. I also have a copy of the federal law here in front of me. The State Healthcare Consent Act gives authority to spouses, adult children, parents, adult siblings, grandparents, and relatives related by blood to make healthcare decisions for individuals unable to consent without seeking legal guardianship if there is no legal guardian and/or attorney in fact. DDSN claims in its most recently revised directive that it has higher authority, third, under the State Adult Healthcare Consent Act than parents and family members unless they obtain legal guardianship, but DDSN is electing not to exercise its authority. It was stated in last week's meeting that Priority 3 of the Consent Act has always been interpreted to apply to DSS, and DDSN is not a custodial agency. Based on these statements, I question how DDSN can continue to claim its third in priority above the parents and family members unless they obtain legal guardianship. What happens when the decision of the family conflicts with those of the agency? Will DDSN not argue that according to its directive, it has higher authority? I support the Legislative Committee's recommendation that Line 8, dropped in 2016 from the Consent Act, be added back as last in priority, number 10. I'll support adding proposed language that clarifies that Priority 3 in the Consent Act applies to a person given priority to make healthcare decisions for the patient when an agency has taken custody of the patient by another statutory provision. Hopefully this clarification, if passed by the General Assembly, will help prevent state agencies from making false claims of higher priority above spouses, adult children, parents, grandparents, and family members under this act. I have submitted recommended changes to the rights of clients with intellectual disabilities to be consistent with the committee's recommended changes to the Consent Act. I would also recommend that the developmental period reference and the definition of intellectual disabilities in legislation and regulations be clearly defined as before age 22 to prevent unnecessary lawsuits as have occurred in the past. Finally, I brought the issue of direct provider billing to the attention of Governor Sanford's MAP Commission in 2003. Now, folks, 14 years ago. I was extremely pleased when DHHS Director Tony Keck finally sent a letter to DDSN dated October 26, 2014, directing that the band system be replaced by July 1st, 2016. I remember thinking I would never see the day of this change. I did not realize how true my prediction would be. 1 month later, Keck resigned, stating he was throwing down his gauntlet, and the progress made toward direct billing being a reality seemed to go by the wayside. Thus, my frustration with DHHS and DDSN because another 14 months have gone by and DSN providers who want to directly bill are still unable to do so. DDSN's director was quoted in the most recent Greenville News financial series as saying any funding system structure change will take significant time and resources to determine and implement. How long do the providers in this state who want to directly bill Medicaid have to wait? This is not a matter of it would be something we should do if we have time and resources and then continue to make excuses that the agency doesn't have enough of either, or DHHS MIS system can't handle it, or we're trying to finalize an administrative contract, or a technical error was made when the waiver was submitted and the wrong box was checked indicating that DDSN is not an organized healthcare delivery system. It's a matter that our state has been out of compliance with Medicaid waiver regulations regarding direct provider billing for years. For at least the past 4 years, the General Assembly, through provisos, directed this agency to work with DHHS to resolve this issue. Rather than DDSN spending more money on contracts defending its current funding system or developing new funding system with consulting firms that subcontract with former DDSN employee ghostwriters, who, according to court testimony, don't even check with CMS regarding the system's compliance with Medicaid, it would be better to concentrate the existing agency resources and time working with DHHS. If not, we're at risk of losing the federal dollars and we're at risk of lawsuits.
Thank you very much. Mary Poole?
You pass these around because I'm doing a lot of self-editing.
Okay.
Thank you for going over the 5. I appreciate it.
All right.
My comments this morning are regarding the need to have the commission revisit the intake process. I noticed it on your agenda, so I thought it was an appropriate time to bring the subject up. These comments are not just mine. They're gathered from Mary Leitner, Rich Lex, Beth Bungie, the owner of Bright Start, Amy Batson, case manager supervisor from Appointed County, and my Maxabilities intake worker, Amanda Brooks. And my full comments I'm just handing out, so I want you to have the detail. But I want you to know that we're most grateful that the commission took up the whole idea and saw the wisdom of bringing intake back to the community providers. We need you to understand that intake and eligibility process completed by providers prior to 2014 was, one, not broken. It did not need to change. It was not excessively lengthy and complicated. It was actually elegant in its simplicity. Since providers only received payment for 90 days, it incentivized getting the process done within that time period. And intake was never, and still isn't, a Medicaid issue. The process was simply this: providers accepted referrals, we established relationships, we visited the home, we gathered documents, we sent them in, we got a decision, we informed people, we started planning. That's it. The current process is trying to maintain separation between the intake provider and the provider of services. It's confusing and cumbersome for people wanting BDSN services. As you all say, the most vulnerable of us. The current process delays people getting added to the waiver waiting list, which is absolutely necessary to obtain services. The current process delays a person being assigned a case manager. The current process puts significant responsibility on the person or the individual interested in services. The current process is not family friendly. You can refer to your packet. You'll see the flow charts and the other charts explaining everything, and you can see how difficult it is if you need that many pages. The flow chart makes look everything like it's working perfectly, is family friendly, and is efficient. Well, the providers in the room feel that exactly the opposite is true, that it is not family friendly, that it is not efficient, and it's most definitely not perfect. I want you to know that getting intake right is extremely important. Intake is the introduction of us as a service delivery system to a family that needs help. I am a mom with children with disabilities, and I have trouble navigating the system, and I've been in it for 30 years. So when I meet somebody, I want them to feel comfortable with me. I want to have a relationship with me so they can say, tell me about this and I'll trust you. And we need that. We can't just throw them to the wolves like this. But the reason I did not give you any detail on each subject was because I wanted to piggyback on what Ms. Johns was saying. And I want you to listen to what I'm saying in conjunction with what Ms. Johns just spoke about. There are seismic changes coming to our system. Huge changes just being pushed out every day from the behavior supports. And she talked about all that, so I'm not going to go over it again. And they're all being implemented at the same time. Being sent down from a compartmentalized system that GDSN is to a system of providers that are generalists. We have to do it all. So you might have it coming from 7 different people, but it's all coming down on our shoulders at the same time. And if intake, which is so simple, should not been hard to do, is not Medicaid compliance issue, turned into this kind of fiasco, I am so afraid of all the things that are coming down on us now that are Medicaid compliance issues. What is going to happen when we don't get that right? The wording needs to be simpler. How we do things need to be better planned. And then I listened to Monday's House Oversight Committee. And I'm in complete disagreement with the conclusion that some of the legislators took, that DDSN seems to have all the responsibility and none of the authority. And I think the absolute opposite is true. DDSN has none of the responsibility. Providers and families do. They have all the authority. So they have the authority to take this runaway train of constant change, slow it down at the very least, and stop it at the best. Rethink how we're implementing this. Get people in here to help you implement it, that know how to do it, that know how to actually implement it, and not just the bureaucrats who know how to write pretty words on paper, but if they don't translate into reality for families and for our consumers, then our system is lost. And more than that, it's going to be lost because we're not going to be able to make Medicaid compliance, and we very well could lose our funding source. So I thank you for allowing more people to come up and speak. And I thank you for listening to us. And I really hope that we can start with this intake process and make our system more entry friendly so folks aren't just totally lost right from the get-go. Let's wait a few months at least before we proceed. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Amy Davenport?
Hi, good morning. Good morning. I want to apologize. First of all, I'm going to speak and have to run. I am the chief curtain puller and prop hander outer for my daughter's play. And so we're practicing, so I got to be there for the curtain. But I wanted to talk to you today about law recommendation number 6. And I want to thank Dr. Judy Johnson for talking because she kind of clarified something for me. But I still, as a parent and as a member of the advocacy groups, I have a real problem with this. And I think my main problem, and I do understand you need to get people paid in a timely manner. I understand that. I mean, if you go to work at Waffle House, I think it's a 2-week hold on your check before you get paid. McDonald's, so you're going to have a lag, not maybe 7 weeks, but a lag anywhere you go to work. State government's probably going to be a month. When I worked at the Budget Controls Board, it was about a month. So I understand that we have that. The problem I have with that is when I worked in state government, and I called some other friends of mine, just only state government, to find out if anything that much has changed since I've been gone. And one of the things that Human Resources drilled into us was we have policy and procedure and safeguards in place for a reason. Because if you send me a hire packet, and I was not Human Resources, but I was involved in hiring. So you send me a hire packet, I want all of these boxes checked. And we're not gonna, I have to have all of these things in order. So if we take out a safeguard in light of the critical incidences that we have already that have increased from 1,953 July 16 to 2,206 this fiscal July. What kind of risks are we taking with our vulnerable people? That's what I want to ask you. You guys have a huge responsibility. You know, it's the entire state and what you guys decide here, and we appreciate it as parents, as advocates. You know, sometimes I think we get up and it doesn't always have to be an adversarial role. We want to work with you. We want to understand, and you guys want your facilities staffed, and that's most certainly what we as parents want. But how are we doing that? What are we circumventing to do that? So my question is, have we looked at everything else that you could do to get these back? I mean, you're going to be training people without the background check coming back. So that's time, that's resources, that's higher packets. That involves everybody. Could there not be a designated person that all they do is get these background checks back for you in a timely manner? Could we not do that? I mean, it seems like instead of taking away a safeguard, let's find out another way to go about doing that. And so that question came up for me, and I'm really bothered by that because I trust my money to my bank. I don't want them hiring someone who can come in and see how the bank runs and what passwords are and have access to laptops. Maybe they're not going to be right with our vulnerable children, but can they walk in and take a laptop? Can they walk in and find out the lay of the building? Are you making your staff vulnerable to someone who you don't know what their background is to come in and even be with your staff? So I think this is a huge, huge concern. I want to see our critical incidences go down. I know you guys do. And so as a parent, I'm really, really opposed to this because I think we should be adding safeguards in light of these things, not taking them away. And then lastly, I just want to say, you know, I don't have a clue what it takes. You would be absolutely right to say if you stepped in my shoes and you had to staff these buildings and you had to do that. No, I don't. I don't. But I am a parent. And y'all in here depend, you have a certain expectation when you go to the bank, when the bus driver picks up your child to transport them, that they've gone through every step on that hire packet and checked it off. And so over the whole state, let's say you do this. And let's say that the person in this building or the person that does it here in Columbia is excellent. And they don't let anything go past their desk without knowing, okay, background check came back, it's not good, that person has to be terminated. They're already hired, but we're not going to let them work here. So that person here is excellent. What about another county? What if they're having an off day? What if it comes in and, like so often happens, the coffee cup gets set on top of it? And that person slides through and goes direct here to a home, maybe only a week before it's found, maybe a month. But what happens in that time period? And so I am very much opposed to it. I've spoken to many parents that are opposed, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Pull the curtain.
Have a good,
Thank you.
have a work time. All right, do we have any commissioners up there? If you don't, I got one. You want me to go? I just want to thank everybody. I was taking my mother to run away from Hurricane Irma. She was in the car. The governor said, you know, any nursing homes had to move, so she was in the car. I had 8 people coming to my house, and really only 6 in the mountains, and I got the word that we didn't have to evacuate. So I have a friend who lives down the street who's 85, and I said, why don't I come to your house? And of course, I lived where the water came in and didn't come in the house, but it came really quickly after that. But the people I really have to talk about, and I mean, for me, it was a little inconvenience. My house is off. It's still dark. It's going to go dark until Maria goes by. But I want to thank everybody who worked on getting everybody who was in harm's way safe. And then, and I'm not going to name any names because you know all who are, but I want to thank all the nurses, the cooks, you know, the bottle washers, everybody who packed all those bags and moved people to all the different places. And then the wonderful places who had those people come into their homes and their communities and took care of them. And I also, like I talk all the time about generators, We have some money for generators, and as we all know, there were places that we would never expect a hurricane to bothered, and we need generators in all of our homes. We just need to do a better job, but I want to thank everybody who did such a wonderful job, and the whole time I had, during the hurricane, I guess it was the longest hurricane in the world, because it went on forever. But the 5 or 7 days that I talked to, the hierarchy, and everybody just did a great job, and everybody was involved in it. So I just wanted to thank everybody for that. All right, Vicki.
Okay. On Monday, September 11th at 4 p.m., facilities at the Oconee BSN board began experiencing power outages. This hurricane remnant hit Oconee pretty hard, and we had winds over 50 miles an hour sustained for like 10 hours. Staff in all residential facilities began bringing out emergency preparedness kits with flashlights and battery operated lanterns. The next morning, 8 community training homes were without power. Arrangements were made by CTH coordinator Amanda Howard and Tammy Bryant for a hot breakfast and help with SLP2 coordinator Steve Raymond. Lunch and dinner was prepared and delivered by day program kitchen staff Renee Carpenter and Ethel Lee and QX coordinator Carol Dillon. Power was restored to 1 of the 8 homes. On September 13th, Oconee DSN board was able to open the day program, so those still without power were able to attend. Electric lifts were brought to the day program to be recharged by maintenance staff Jamie Metz. He also took a small generator to a home to operate a special electric bed for a Hasky individual. People were able to bathe and shower at other CTHs with power and at the day program. That evening, House Manager Brian White at Keith Lane Community Training Home cooked and delivered meals to those 7 community training homes still without power. Later that evening, power was restored to 1 CTH. On September 14th, 6 community training homes remained without power, and residential coordinators Tammy Bryant and Amanda Howard purchased and delivered breakfast to clients and staff at approximately 2:45, 3 days after the storm hit. All power was restored. 3 days. This is an example of what happens behind the scenes in all programs all over the state when the lights go out. Everyone works together and they get it done. To all of you who suffered personal or property damage caused by Irma, our thoughts and prayers are with you then, and will continue to be with you in all disasters that may come our way. Please keep telling us as a commission how we can help you keep people safe during times like these. One of the problems with downsizing, and I never thought I'd say this, but there aren't enough BHDD-OIDD employees. But went back in my day as a provider, we wouldn't have a snowstorm that Charlie Hughes didn't call and say, do you have bread and milk? And that was his way of saying, are you okay? Are you ready? But we had what are called program coordinators that operated out of the regional centers. But the thing is like in this situation, I called to check on Oconee, Eva called me, then Eva called Oconee, then Eva calls Tom. It would be nice in our emergency preparedness plan, because you're busy doing it when you're out there and you're a provider. It would be nice if somebody from the team called people have suffered a direct hit and just check in at the end. Just making that suggestion. That's all I have, Eva.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'd like to brag a little bit on my local board, York County. I had the pleasure of first going earlier this week to their direct care staff support dinner. And this was just a celebration basically they threw for the direct care staff that was set up in such a way that either staff going on to duty could go beforehand or staff coming off duty could go there. They had karaoke, music, food. Everyone was just in really good spirits. It was just a really, really good example, I thought, of one of our boards taking the opportunity to get to the people who are direct on hand, with our consumers, and show them some appreciation outside of just here's a little bit of, here's another dollar in your check or something like that. So I really want to compliment them on that. I also want to compliment them on, even though the York County didn't get any sort of significant impact from the hurricane, some of the things that I'm seeing them do in terms of preparing ahead of time, as we are a situation that we are isolated from the coast and basically relatively geographically in a good spot if there's evacuation. Some of the plans that I heard them discussing as far as just simply the number of cots that are being purchased and the ongoing plans for if somebody needs to come up there from the coast, what they are ready to do and how they took this as an option and said, okay, we didn't have to do it this time, but what did we get right in our preparations and what do we need to work on? One of the things I think that they're looking at is the fact that within York County, we have very limited, basically only at the hospital, if you have somebody who's particularly medically fragile, beds available. And so what can we do in a situation where we have evacuees that need that sort of environment? What can DSN provide for those individuals outside of, a generator at the hospital providing those support? So I just really want to brag a little bit on my local board and compliment them both for what they did for the direct care staff and also just the level of Vicki said in terms of using this as an opportunity to run a test run and see what they did right and what they did wrong. It was very impressive when I discussed that with the staff.
Anybody else? Okay. Vicki, the legislative committee report, please.
Okay. The legislative committee met on Thursday, September the 14th to discuss 26 recommendations from staff to change current statutes. The committee did not change 17 of those 26 recommendations as they were primarily updated definitions and terminology. 7 recommendations were changed by the committee. 1 was tabled and 1 was removed completely. The first committee motion is to recommend that the commission approve recommendations 1 through 7 and 9 through 17 and 19 and 22 as presented and distributed by staff. That would be the motion from the legislative committee.
And since,
Yeah.
since it comes from, since,
I don't have a copy.
okay.
Out of the 26
Okay.
recommendations,
Can I just ask a question? Do we need to vote on these, or since it comes from committee?
you don't need a second.
I don't need a second. Okay, that's what I need. Okay, all right.
So recommendations 1 through 7, 9 through 17, number 19 and number 22, as presented and distributed by staff. The committee recommends those be approved.
Okay. Since it, we don't need a second, all those in favor?
We have some discussion for quick that.
No, you like to talk? Yes, of course. Excuse me. Any discussion?
Is this the ones that are sort of administrative? These are the non-controversial
Yeah,
ones.
these are the non-completely, believe me.
Okay,
Okay.
that's,
All
thank
right. They're updated definitions, changing DMR to DSN, and there's some terminology changes. That's it.
That's it, okay.
Okay, so number 6, we are approving the being allowed to hire them. Is that what, I want to make sure I'm clear on this.
Yeah, the way you worded it made it sound like typical exclusion.
Oh,
You got 1 through 7, which includes 6. The 6 is the one that we've had multiple people speak about.
Right, yeah, that's it.
No, that's not
All right,
six,
let me
not
do it again. Sorry, Bill. All right, it's gonna be 1 through 5.
Yep. 1 through 5. Can we vote on 1 through 5?
And 7,
Okay.
and 9 through 17, and 19 and 22.
Okay.
so you removed number 6, basically.
Remove number 6.
Okay.
But any other discussion on anything else? Bill? Okay.
Trying to figure the quickest way to get through it. Yeah, that was a good catch.
Yeah. No, I know number 6 is going to be discussed.
Okay, so we're skipping the ones that came up last night as far as the language.
We're not making a motion on that yet.
On those, okay.
Is that okay? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Aye. Okay. Continue. 6.
Okay, the way this was done in our book, because number 6 was not approved, it is not. The next one in sequence would be number 8, for us to look at.
How about number 6?
The way the staff sent this out was everything that we changed or approved was in one, and then the next one was tabled, and then the next one was removed. The next one in order is gonna be on page 3, under 8.
Some discussion, you want to read it?
Well, it has to do with the Adult Health Care Consent Act. The committee clarified number 3. Number 3 has always, you can see in red there, number 3 has in the past referred to an agency given legal custody through the court system, and primarily it's meant DSS. So we changed the staff recommendation to number 3, a person given priority to make healthcare decisions for the patient when the agency has taken custody of the patient by another statutory provision. Any question about that?
What's the impact of that? Explain that to me.
We can't confuse ourselves with somebody who's been given custody like the DSS, or mental health, or for that matter, Department of Corrections. If they've been before court, the judge has decided this entity has custody, that's much different from DDSN. DDSN doesn't have custody. If I go to the post office and buy a stamp, that doesn't make me in the custody of the post office. You know what I'm saying?
Depends on what your definition of custody is.
Oh,
No, I mean, look, we're dealing with the law here, okay?
Yeah, we are. Now, we didn't have a lawyer on the committee.
And
So go
the
ahead.
definition of custody can have conflict. I mean, there is a legal custody where a court says you have legal custody person.
And that's what.
Then there is custody in terms of, if you walk to the post office and the postmaster inspector sees you, guess what? They have custody of you.
But you would
Okay.
have been, you would have to have been given
So-
custody by another statute.
I'm just trying to figure out that's what it is. I'm just saying I don't know what
Yeah.
custody is.
No, I understand.
What's the stack of comments on exchange?
I think just like Commissioner Thompson was indicating, it was trying to clarify that there are, which is why on the implications for other agencies, there are a lot of agencies that are responsible for care, which is different than custody. So whatever changes are made here will also affect other agencies as far as, so there is a difference legally, operationally between legal custody and responsibility of care. The agency and the providers have been afforded the opportunity to make certain decisions in the absence of family because they have the responsibility of care. And so this addition would remove that ability except for following, and I'll agree to the rest of what's in it, except for following all of that. And in the way it's written right now, Shanna, please interject if I say anything incorrectly. The way it's written right now, it would require a physician to intercede and make a decision before DDSN or a provider could make any healthcare decisions in the absence of family. Did I describe that correctly? Right. Which is a structural change in how things operate on a day-to-day basis.
We talked about moving the 10 down, yeah, they did push. But
We're not there yet.
yeah, with the agency having custody, yeah, there are other agencies that were probably using this provision that did not have custody of the people they were using this statutory provision for, so we don't know really the ripple effect.
So we were trying to, the committee is trying to remove the ambiguity so that we won't have that confusion that resulted this past year because of that.
Is there a chance that the agency that has care of this person doesn't know they have care of this person? When this person is in our care, in our custody?
I don't know how they wouldn't know. I mean, like, if you've got somebody in residential services, if you've got somebody like you know you have a responsibility of care. I can't really think of a scenario where they wouldn't realize they have a responsibility of care.
All right, we're giving priority, number 3 gives priority to an agency only if they have custody by another statutory provision.
And that's the legal, going back to what Commissioner O'Mell, that would be the legal definition of custody, and DDSN by definition is not currently a custodial agency.
Right, so now, in addressing the number 8 thing.
Do you want to vote on the one that was just?
Well, let's just vote on that whole.
We voted on that big package.
No, just this one recommendation. This is recommendation, number 8.
Okay.
And it all has to do with the Adult Health Care Facility Act, and we only have 2 changes. One is defining number 3 as having legal custody.
Right.
And the other is taking number 8, which was the staff recommendation, based on the commission recommendation. Our thought in the committee was that it was not the intent of the commission to jump ahead of grandparents, that we wanted to be last in priority, because we are talking about priority orders. So the committee removed number 8 and is recommending that the commission's recommendation be that DDSN be placed at last at number 10. Remember, we're not changing the law here. We are simply recommending to the legislature that we have looked at these things and these are the commission's recommendations. So we need to fit, this is one we need to fix.
Okay. Any other discussion on this?
That is the motion from the committee.
Okay. No other discussion? All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Okay.
The next one is page 8. And in regard to, and page 9, so in regard to recommendation 18, and I believe 20 and 21, since the committee met, there has been new information that has come around concerning parents and guardians and families. So I'm thinking that the staff, the committee responded to recommendations from the staff. And I'm thinking with this new information, the staff would like to not have a recommendation at this point until further discussion and exploration. So therefore, the committee would not have anything to make a motion on. So we're going to skip 18, 20, and 21. 23 is on page 10. This has to do with 10 and 11. This has to do with changes in goals and objectives. If you'll see those in red, basically it says that the team sets the goals and that you can change objectives and methodologies throughout the year, but that to change goals, it's going to go back to the team to change the broader goals. And it also changes it, and we went along with staff's recommendation that if a person is not making progress, that the goal be able to be readdressed within 6 months instead of a year, because Dr. Buscemi said that was what's considered now to be best practice. We made another change on that one regarding family members, but we're going to take that out of the equation for now. We'll go back to that.
So not number 10.
The staff is no longer recommending that families be taken out, so the committee has, can't address something that's not recommended. We are just addressing the objectives and goals.
So have any other questions or discussions on this? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
May I ask a clarifying question? I just want to make sure we understood. So the commission just approved all of the recommended changes except the red in number 10 within number 23? Did I interpret that correctly?
Okay. It's confusing.
Not approved to be discussed later.
Yeah.
The other stuff was approved. Okay. I just want to make sure I was good. Thank you.
Then, page 13. This was a square footage issue. And I just want to reiterate what we discussed here, that is a The committee tabled it. We don't have any recommendation on it.
14. Oh, they different, okay, sorry.
What, the recommendation number is 20, is that what, which one is on
Number 20 in it. Beside these, provide a minimum of 50 square feet. It's number
Yeah,
20.
it's number 20. We were not sure about how this one might be, the recommendation from staff was that we change it to 50 square foot per participant to those present in the center. And the committee has asked the staff to reword this to ensure that overcrowding cannot occur by putting a system in, and by putting a system in place to monitor the number of people in the building, and by not allowing estimates based on fluctuating numbers such as attendance to result in risk. I'm trying to be very succinct about a very, very lengthy discussion. But also the committee wanted to make sure, this is Mary Ellen's thing, she's not here, but that if we take out specifics such as no toxic paint and no sharp edges, that those specifics are listed in some other regulatory source, such as licensing requirements, and not left to chance. So the committee does not have a recommendation at this time on that one, because we've asked the staff to go back and respond to those questions. Okay? I don't think we have to.
We're not going to vote on that.
All right. So the last one is number 6. This is another lengthy discussion. We were not sure how, if you have people in there and they're being trained and you haven't done criminal background checks, how you're going to monitor whether or not they're coming in contact with some individuals. And so we decided to remove that one because we felt it was an unnecessary risk to take. So the committee is not recommending any action on number 6. So again, no action, no motion. Okay.
Is there a plan to revisit that based upon the feedback that we got today?
I would hope that the staff would revisit that, because there are other ways. Ms. Davenport said that you had a couple of good ideas about assigning staff, maybe we check with somebody. I'm being told that the DSS check is what's taking a long time. It's not the criminal background check. But, well, it could be both.
it? Ebbs and flows.
Okay. There are other things too, having been in those positions and having faced turnover, if you hire substitutes before the vacancy exists and you start training people before that exists, you have a high turnover rate depending on your size. But even as Will County, we were able to do that, and you automatically have somebody in place. But like Ms. Davenport said, with critical incidents on the rise, we just did not feel as a committee that we were able to, that we wanted to take that safety check away.
But, I mean, as far as the staff, I mean, are we seeing this, what we've heard is a gap of basically 2 months of no paycheck for somebody? I mean, is that a result that we are in fact?
Right, and part of it is the way the law and the statute is written, in the sense that it's got to, by definition, come through BDSN and then go from BDSN to the provider. And in some other circumstances, they could just do it directly. Well, because of how it's established, and we can't change it, we can't control it. We've actually tried to talk with SLED and talk with them, say, can the individual provider go directly through you guys and get the federal background check? And we were told the answer is no. And so unfortunately, it takes in our system longer than it does some other entities that have to do background check, just because of the weird quirkiness.
That's a question. Is that a statutory provision? Is that a SLED regulatory position?
Federal statute.
It's a federal statute, and who's listed as having access to what?
Yeah, okay, so, I mean, I understand from dealing with an NCIC report, it's a restricted use thing. But generating it up, if you've got somebody who's qualified, it's just a matter of
It has to come through DHEC because of the way it's written. They're the channeling agency that gets the FBI check. It has to go through DHEC and then can come to us.
This is where government can't get out of its own way. This is absolutely asinine. To even have this conversation is asinine.
I have clients who daily do background checks. They have them through private companies. They get the entire background check within 3 days, and that person is hired. They do the same thing we're talking about here. They hire the person, the check comes in 3 or 4 days later, and it's massive, and it's inclusive. And it might be $119, or it might be $79. This is not reality that we're working in here, and we're getting this, we can't do a thing about it because of DHHS or whoever it is, the letters that are flying through my email on a regular basis. Oh, you can't do that. You know, there's an issue here. This is not practical knowledge. This is extremely frustrating. As a private business person, this drives me crazy. This conversation, and I want to understand, I want our guests to understand, and our providers, this is crazy. We shouldn't have this conversation. This is the dumbest thing I've dealt with since I've been on this commission. This is a simple process, but because the government can't get out of its own way, now we can't hire people. They're going to go work at Burger King first. We got to figure out a better way to do this. And I don't know what that is, but it's not coddling up to all these agencies who can't do a thing. I mean, all we're hearing about in these statements is the circle. It's a toilet. We're just circling the toilet. Sorry. That's the reality. It's a private business guy.
Why can't we do like he says? Why can't we just order a private?
Because you got to go through SLED, through DHEC, through all these layers to muddy the waters, to not do a thing different than what we could do on our own.
What requires us to have that check as opposed to a private check at this point? Where's the requirement that we have to get the check that's the formal government NCIC?
I think the statute clearly says an FBI check.
What's that, the federal statute?
Yeah. I have to go back and look, but there's something that requires that the check has to come from the FBI. And the FBI has to go through the channeling agency with the state. And for us, it's DHEC. We went to them, and I mean, SLED checks are different, that's easy to get. Right. But this is the FBI, if somebody hasn't lived in the state long enough.
Yeah, I mean, NCI checks, getting the solicitor's office, they can run that in about 15 seconds.
Right, because they're one of the approved agencies to get it, yeah.
So I think the issue, that I agree with you that it doesn't need to be, we need to work on the process. But I think the staff need to work on the process.
We're welcome to go back and but we have recent conversations hoping to go, okay, are we sure this is the interpretation? Are we sure that either DDSN or the providers, directly can't request and receive this information? And I mean, recently, as in the last few months, that opinion was confirmed that no, the interpretation of that federal law is that it must go through DHEC, and then through DHEC through us, and then through us to the providers. And so DHEC has their priorities and their workload, not throwing them under the bus at all. We have frequent meetings with them, but the response time on those has varied considerably over time.
Well, if it takes so long for them to do anything, why don't we do the way that Bill's saying, and then when they catch us, ask for forgiveness? It sounds like it takes years and years and years for us to get, and we have gotten all these people employed.
I did not make that
exactly, and we would have exactly what we would get from the other group. I mean, it seems to me there's a better way to do it.
It's the federal, and the federal's controlling those Medicaid, right? And that's the whole point. We're being
I know, but you can always ask for forgiveness,
But-
my goodness.
Yeah, well, but the other thing is can we use that to still?
Take that off the record. I mean. You gotta do it a different way.
All right, so our primary concern here is making sure that we're protecting our consumers. Right. And so the original proposal was to allow folks to be employed without that, but just not have that contact. Is there anything that we can do in terms of adding a provision to sort of address both while we're waiting on the federal requirement that if we get an equivalent check, that provides us enough protection that we can then allow these people to be employed to address what we want to address, which is getting these people in the employment pipeline so we keep them. In other words, can we comply with the federal rules and do something extra so that we can get these people in the door quicker.
What about the cost?
Okay, that is always.
And I
an issue.
really think the staff need to take this up a little bit further.
Well, they need to take it up with the providers.
Well, that's right.
I mean, this is where we need to work as a team.
Right.
You know, I mean, I know how to solve the problem, I just can't solve it with all this crap we gotta deal with. I mean, the problem's easily solved, but we can't solve it that way. So now,
And unfortunately, we can't not deal with that.
right, exactly, we have to deal with it. So now we've got to bring the providers in and the staff and figure out a way that we can,
And there may be a way,
I
Gary.
think there probably is.
Yeah, I agree. There may be, but for now, the committee's motion is.
I'm not a lawyer, but if I sleep in a Holiday Inn tonight, can I come back?
So
This is what it's gonna say?
what I would request is that we revisit this at the next meeting. I may have that until we get a resolution of this. And I would ask this be an ongoing agenda item until we get something that addresses. We've had a direct plea.
You're making a motion of that?
I'm not making, I'm
Why
saying
not?
this.
Make a motion,
Well,
then it's
there's already a
already.
motion, let me tell you, there's already a motion on the table, and we met, and this is our motion now. We're making a motion just in response to a staff recommendation, okay? The staff recommendation was take it out. It let the, employ people without having it. Our motion was just to remove, we don't, not have an action on number 6. So, actually, we're not, I don't think that we even need a motion.
Okay, so let's say we don't make a motion on it, but then we can make a motion.
You can restate your
From
motion
you
to table
and
number
saying
6.
that we address it every month until we figure it out.
Well, our original motion was not to take action on number 6, so we're still not taking action.
That's
on number 6, right? Okay.
No motion to be made by the committee with regard to number 6.
Yes.
At all.
All right, that's your last one. Then have something else to say. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
I don't know that necessarily requires a motion, but I would request legislative committee to keep this on there and that this be placed on the agenda for the October meeting to see what progress has been made.
Sounds good.
Because I think we need to figure out what's in cap.
All right, policy committee.
Motion to place on the agenda, motion.
Table. Motion on table.
I think that needs to be a motion.
Well, then make a motion. I'm not sure what motion to put on the agenda or motion.
The motion to put it on the agenda till we solve the problem. And we see, and monthly, we get an update on this and gear up more pressure on a monthly basis between staff and providers to come up with, and legal, to come up with the language that we need, that we can skin this cat.
And I second Bill's motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Okay,
I'll get with you
anything
on
else?
that, Sandra, if you need me.
Vicki, anything else?
No.
Okay, go on to the policy committee.
People who work in the policy committee.
Okay. The policy committee met this morning.
I have a question. Do we have a committee that you're not chairing?
No, there aren't.
Listen, I asked a lot of people.
Queen of the committee thing today.
I had to beg them.
Okay, so the committee discussed the needs executive limitations policy this morning, and items 1 and 2, we recommended no change on. Number 3, we recommended the contract amount that has keeps coming up over and over and over and over again. So we discussed the LAC recommendation, and what we decided was to change A to B, and A will say, our recommendation is to bring any contracts for procurement to the commission for approval when the full contractual amount exceeds $200,000, excluding contract adjustments due to filling vacancies based on consumer choice. Contracts with providers to increase capacity that exceed $200,000 will need to be approved by the commission. So the difference there is if a provider is has vacancies. We will not be interfering with consumer choice. But if they intend to expand and build a new home and have a contract exceeds $200,000, then the commission will approve that. And then also in number 3, number B, item B, follow through capital improvement expenditures within the fiscal year as approved by the commission. An explanation will be provided to the commission on capital improvement expenditures approved by the commission but not spent within the fiscal year on the year following the year of approval. All capital improvement accounts retaining balances not expended will be closed out within the 5-year materials management timeframe. New capital improvement accounts may not be created without the approval of the commission. No more than 10% of the project money may be transferred from one capital improvement account to the other without commission approval. And that is because some projects have remaining balances in them. And C is present to the commission changes to the organizational chart that result in additional positions exceeding $200,000 prior to implementation.
You just read something about 10%. Where am I missing out?
I did not have, the committee changed that. Made that change just now in the minute. I didn't bring my typewriter with me, so.
I don't know, I had 2 typewriters.
I don't know.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions or discussions on this?
What does C mean in plain language?
What is what?
C mean in plain language?
Yeah,
What is
that's
that?
what I need.
No, that's not that. I'm trying.
C means that if you're going to change the structure of the organization,
Of this or of DDSN?
DDSN.
Okay.
like we just added a Medicaid waiver division, and about 13 employees were added, but I would like for that information to be presented to the commission when we're about to do that, so that if there's any objection, or so the commission might be able to input in those situations. And that's the motion from the committee on number 3.
Since it comes from committee, it needs a second. Any other discussions?
You doing this by section or by?
We've got, the ones we're changing.
Only the ones we're changing, unless you want to go along.
We can do them all. We can follow them all together,
I mean, I think it's keep them separate from.
Yes. Okay, well, that's the motion from the committee.
All those in favor?
I am.
Oh, you want to talk?
Yeah. So what's, I'd like, so that wasn't part of the committee, what's the staff input on those changes? Does staff have any input?
Yeah, I do feel the need that I have to kind of offer the note of caution. I discussed this in the committee as well, that as far as, approving expansion on an individual provider basis, my note of caution is the agency, either through BHHS or through our own mechanisms, or most likely a hybrid of both, we have established minimum expectations and minimum standards for performance. It is a very slippery legal slope. If the commission starts to establish the practice of allowing a provider that is in good standing. Now, providers aren't always in good standing, and we've had some experiences with that lately. But if a provider has met those minimum thresholds and is in good standing, the commission starts to engage in a practice of allowing this provider to expand and not that provider to expand. So that is my note of legal caution with regards to that.
For instance, this provider's been in the newspaper. We're not really sure we want them in the newspaper, so we just put it to another provider. That's the legal ramifications as far as I'm concerned. We can't take a human thought out of there.
Yeah, I think that's, the whole thing is a commission decision.
As part of the policy meeting, that was not an excellent part of the policy meeting, because I was on speakerphone in my car, and so I wasn't able to read as we were discussing and process it in that manner. Is there some kind of language that we could add, something to the effect of in good standing, and if
If there's something that is not, if the provider is not in good standing, it shouldn't even come to the commission, in my opinion. I can't imagine that that issue would even be brought.
Well, it has. It has been brought, with the providers are not in good standing. I'm just saying, this is our, I'm trying to figure out which one the objection is.
I think, yeah, I think
Okay,
Is that we're discussing?
okay. If you have the funding mechanism, the way it is organized right now, is that the money is attached more to the addresses than it is to the individual. So the concern of us interfering with client choice is really not a valid issue, because if you contract, like your example with Alan Bond, if you contract with a provider for $1 million contract, that is one issue. And if they have vacancies, they're gonna have, not a contract renewal problem. In other words, that's not gonna expand over. But if it does, because of cost of living or whatever, those vacancies have already been created and they exist. So this would resolve it for now, as far as separating the difference between what is consumer choice and existing bed. If I say I want a bed in Oconee County, and so it's my choice, and I want you to build me a house, find 3 other people to move into it with me, that's not gonna happen, you know? So we're not denying anybody choice, because they're not able to choose a bed that does not exist. So the thing is we had a contract, for example, with Babcock that went over $10 million last year, more than what we approved. We had a multi-million-dollar contract with Thera. We had other contracts that didn't have anything to do with consumer choice. So we have to define and clarify the policy so that we can have consumer choice and allow that to happen. But when it comes to expanding that, then I do think that needs to come to the commission, because that's up to the commission to decide as far as how far in the business is going to go with X housing group. We have to look at what else they're doing and how well are they doing it before we just grow and let it get out of hand and go, oops, look, we've got all these people here now and we have a problem. So I really think that is not interfering with consumer choice. I really think that we need to have some control to prevent some of the problems we're having now. So I guess we just don't have to vote.
Hannah, is this outside of our legal,
I think it's
covering?
getting pretty close, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other discussions?
We've tabled this issue, I've brought this issue several times, and the main issue is it needed clarification. So that was the effort to try to clarify and draw the line between when does the $200,000 threshold need to come before us and when it doesn't. Are there any other thoughts on that? Besides, I mean, because the main issue is why it's client choice, the money follows the person. You can't control if the money's kind of fluid as to where it goes. But is that different, and this is asking staff, is that different than additional funds above what's already been approved for different providers to build new beds?
And at least the examples that I hear the commissioner speaking of all center around residential services, which is, I mean, that's where the big dollar signs are. So, but there's also different types of contracts. I mean, sometimes it's, we agree to pay you as the provider this per unit, and a unit is defined as this, and you bill us and, you know, let us know how many units that you, so we've also got different types of contracts. One possibility for discussion purposes is looking at this, because at least from what I'm hearing, a lot of the concern seems to center around residential expansion and residential development, as opposed to early intervention, job supports, day services. And so there are different types of contracts and different versions of expansion. Y'all as a governing body already, from a fiscal management point of view, make a decision every year. Are we as an service delivery system gonna expand? And if so, we think we have the money to expand by 40 beds, 60 beds, and there's usually a range because, the funding associated with an individual is individualized. And so, one possibility for discussion is to look at that and have the wording be framed such that it's about residential expansion. The issue that I, kind of said, I feel like I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't offer the note of caution of the kind of slippery slope from a legal perspective, that limiting it to residential doesn't make that go away. But it makes it a little bit more clear in the operational, just, how
Well, I
it's done.
think the biggest examples, when you're talking about multiple millions of dollars, those are the biggest examples. But it wasn't intended to be just about residential. It's gonna be a lot harder to meet that $200,000 threshold, as you said earlier, if we're talking about early intervention projects. We're probably not gonna hit it at all. So it's a non-issue. What I think we have to, like Katie said, we looked at this policy. I think this is the fourth time that the committee has taken up this issue. And, at some point in time, you just can't keep asking until you get the answer you want to hear. It's just, this is it. We're trying to clarify the difference so that we're not interfering in client choice. And I think we've done that.
Can I just make one thing? Commissioner Thompson made a comment about Babcock, $10 million. A lot of that's the pay raises and the cost of living increases that we've got over the last several years. Probably 3 or 4 or 5 million of that is related to that, Babcock being our biggest provider. So you're going to get 10, 15% increase in their contracts related to those items, which all are approving us in some degree. Of course, most of it's cost of living and pay increases related to the general assembly, and we pass that on to the provider network. So the $10 million is some of that, and some of it is because Babcock being the biggest, they had a lot of people that had home slots have taken in Richmond County, Hudson County, have chosen Babcock as financial manager. So that's growth of expansion that took place over the 3 or 4 years.
Well, the objection to the $200,000 spending authority has been pretty consistent, from the staff. And I understand that. But on the other hand, if you look at operationally, what is the job and what it is that we're trying to not do, which is limit client choice, but at the same time, there's all these other things that contracts with this firm and contracts that have nothing to do with client choice. So we've separated that out and met that request. So, other than not have spending authority, I don't know what else we can do. We can't leave it at 200,000 period because nobody likes that result. So we've stretched it out and we've said this and this and this to make it more clear. What else can we do? So that is the motion of the committee. Those changes to number 3.
Okay. I think we
Can I ask what the vote was in the committee? I'm just curious.
unanimous. So, y'all would like to vote? Or would y'all like to table it? I think let's go ahead and vote. We've been talking, since I've been here, we have voted on this 4 times. I wouldn't even vote on it and leave it the way it is, but, I don't have that choice because we've already voted on it 4 times. Right. And I think it's wrong that we're voting on it, but I have more than one commission, so it's been brought up again, and we've always approved it before, so. It comes from.
Who was on the committee?
Sandy. Okay. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Bill? Yea, nay.
Are you calling for opposition?
No, I said, are you voting yea or nay? Okay, I'm doing it, not on the title, I'm doing it. I vote yea, so that's all those opposed. The ayes have it, so it passes. Okay, anything else?
The next one is number 12. Present to the commission for vote any administrative directives that cause significant changes to the service delivery system or increase restrictions in reporting abuse, neglect, exploitation, critical incidents, or sexual assault prior to implementation. This was written, I will say that this was written in the meeting minutes a couple years back, and pretty much it's being followed most of the time. And, you know, just instead of having things in meeting minutes and other commissions having to remember that they're in there, it needs to be in this policy.
Anybody have any
That's the
questions? Okay, that's the motion. Mr. Commissioner Swity, going to take a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous.
Number 13 is present to the commission for voting any recommended changes to legislation prior to requesting changes from the General Assembly. And I think we all know that we discussed that that should be the rule. So that's a motion.
Any discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Number 14, be responsible for ensuring the safety, security, and welfare of the individuals served and staff of BDSN, and perform the duties to maintain their well-being during a disaster situation or when a disaster is considered imminent. Follow the agency disaster preparedness plan and remain in or return to the command area and remain in areas with not limited communication other than communication lost by reason of the disaster the entire duration of the event. And that's the motion.
Any discussion?
Why are we, what is this? I don't understand what we're talking about here. Other than we clearly can read it and understand it, but isn't this understood in the normal operations of this agency?
I think it's important for the state director to be, when there is a natural disaster coming our way.
I'm not sure why we as Commissioner are setting a policy in HR matter.
That's exactly right.
My question is, why does this have to be a policy level initiative?
Because it's not happening.
Well, that doesn't mean you put it into a policy. That means you take it up on an HR basis. In my opinion, there are certain things that you have at a policy level, and there are certain things you deal with on an employment issue, on an HR level.
Well, this is a problem over the past 2 years. And, you know, and to me, we have one executive end policy, and I think we need to be clear about what the expectations are in the event of a disaster. And I don't know that we have been.
I want the record to reflect that we shouldn't be having this conversation. So,
Okay, this is a, came from committees, so therefore we don't need a second. So we'll vote on it. So let's vote on it. All those in favor?
I'm going to abstain.
We all, okay. So we all.
are we going to call for a vote?
Oh, I thought we're going to.
You have to ask all those in favor, all those opposed. We don't know when we're supposed to.
All those in favor? And y'all all abstained.
I'm not abstaining.
You said you wanted to, what did you say? You said you didn't want to.
You hadn't called for the vote, so I didn't say anything.
Oh, okay. Yes, sorry.
She called for all in favor, but we're
I
asking,
called all in favor.
They're waiting on all.
we're waiting for all opposed.
All opposed. And 2 abstains, right?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. All right. Anything else? Thank you very much. And,
Video policy.
what?
Video policy.
Oh, the video policy.
The other item on the policy agenda was the video,
We don't have a
recording of BDSN commission meeting.
I have extra copies if you need it. Who needs a copy?
No problem.
This was presented by the staff, so. And there was no opposition to it. So the motion from the committee is to be adopted.
Okay, you want to do it right in a second?
Y'all stop.
So, I'm learning, you know?
This is the recommendation of the committee is to approve the video recording of BHDD commission meetings as presented.
Can I have a vote? Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. All right, thank you very much. And,
You'll be happy to hear my state director report is short.
good.
Couple things.
Yeah, here by 12.
You heard, a couple times previously, we had our, first, presentation to the House Legislative Oversight Committee on Monday. They have posted my PowerPoint and supplemental information as well as the video of that presentation on their website. On BDSN's website is a copy of the presentation and the supplemental information. This is the first of what we expect to be a quite fairly lengthy series of meetings and presentations. We do know the schedule for the next 4 meetings. They are all at 10 o'clock in the block building, but the next one is scheduled for October 10th. The one after that, October 24th. Currently November 2nd, though there is a possibility that meeting will be changed, and then November 30th. And so they provided a list of information that they requested from the agency after last Monday's meeting and before the 10th. They'll give that to us in writing. We haven't gotten it yet, but we're already starting to work on it because, you know, we were told verbally. And so that process is ongoing. The Senate oversight, which is a very different process, we're anticipating this fall for that process to wrap up, at least in a draft report or a finalized report to be presented to the committee. And so that process is continuing to happen parallel. On Tuesday, the new RFP for the Quality Improvement Organization was posted. So this is something that's been in the works for a while. I know we've talked about that several times. It was just posted on Tuesday. So if you kind of backwards engineer that timeline, then it looks like it's likely for it to be awarded in early November and most likely to go into effect on January 1st. And just to kind of refresh your memories, a lot of these changes that are occurring as a part of this move the quality improvement system more towards an outcome focus. And one of the specific things is there's an addition of some of the work and measures from the Council on Quality Leadership that'll be included in part of that, and that's very well recognized on a national level. Now that is public, we couldn't share a lot of stuff consistent with state procurement processes until that RFP was posted. We will be sharing some summary handouts and whatnot as far as what those upcoming changes are to make sure that everybody is aware. Another thing that went out, I believe yesterday, maybe Tuesday, there is an upcoming webinar that is going to be hosted by DHHS. It is on September 28th at 10 o'clock. And this is to talk about some of the action plans and preliminary data with regards to the PCG reviews that have been, the site reviews that have been going on for both day program locations and residential locations. I will caution that the data is on the data that was shared earlier this week, and I did forward to the commission, as well as the provider network, that it is preliminary. It's only part of the data. It's only part of the information. So we anticipate the numbers changing, as well as they are a preliminary interpretation based on that site review. There is still going to be additional review and additional layers, for lack of a better way of putting it, before any particular location or any particular site is deemed to be compliant or not compliant with the final rule. And all of this is prep work in the process of making sure that individual settings are compliant with the final rule. If you'll remember, the original deadline was supposed to be March of 2019, and that has been extended into March of 2022. by the federal government. And so DHHS is hosting a webinar to talk about some of the specifics and make themselves available to answer questions, because I have a sneaky suspicion it's going to generate a lot of questions. So just make sure everybody's aware of that. And then a couple things you've heard today as well that have been in the process. You guys have already previously approved some changes to the critical needs reporting process, not critical needs, critical incidents reporting process. We sent, and for comment from the provider network, a draft directive. We got some pretty significant comments. In the interest, you guys have had some instructions to me about making sure that the various directives are really, really clear and, you know, not up for misinterpretation. And so as some of the feedback we've gotten, we're actually going to break out and create a separate directive related to some of the operational issues, i.e., you know, the example that we keep talking about is a lawnmower was stolen out of the backyard, you know, out of the back shed, and it really doesn't impact directly, you know, clients and consumer care. So pulling that out, we do anticipate to release that, if not sometime today, then probably tomorrow. And so that is moving along. You heard in public comment today, we have a lot of changes in the air. We really do. There's a lot of things going on simultaneously, and it does, I mean, I agree, it makes it difficult for the providers to sometimes keep up with everything that's going on. It makes it difficult for staff. And so with regards to all the various changes that we have overlapping and going on simultaneously. So that this is another example of some of those things we have going on with regards to that. And that is what I have for my business report.
Great, thank you very much. Could I please have Melissa Ritter come up? Thank you. I'm going to get you to introduce yourself. And
I'm Melissa Ritter. I work here in the Head and Spinal Cord Injury Division at DDSN. And we
pull
just
it up.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I told Susan I was going to be like her and not speak loud enough, but
that's okay. No problem.
So we just wanted to acknowledge that September is National Spinal Cord Injury Awareness Month. So here at DDSN this month, we have done some internal awareness and prevention initiatives. We sent out information weekly regarding spinal cord injury and some prevention tips regarding distracted driving, which many of us are guilty of, falls and sports-related injury. And we are hoping to expand our, this and other prevention initiatives through the year. And I just want to introduce Angela Rodriguez, who's the Executive Director of the South Carolina Spinal Cord Injury Division, and she's going to share with you some information regarding current spinal cord injury trends.
Great, thank you.
Hi.
Thank you. I was going to say good morning, but it's kind of almost afternoon now, so.
What do you mean? It's not good yet.
It's good enough. It's good enough. I'm Angela Rodriguez. I'm from the South Carolina Spinal Cord Injury Association. I'm the Executive Director. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about spinal cord injury. And what is spinal cord injury? A lot of people hear about that, but they don't understand what it is. Excuse me. Spinal cord injury is damage to the spinal cord, which is a spaghetti-like bundle of nerves enclosed in the vertebrae of the spinal column. And it makes up with the brain, it makes up the central nervous system. And there are bundles of nerves that go through the body. Excuse me, I've got some allergy stuff going on. The brain, the injury of the cord can happen anytime it is bruised or nicked or crimped or damaged in any other ways. And depending on where the injury occurs, it depends on how much injury is affected, how much paralysis is affected. So, for example, if you have a thoracic injury from the neck down, you might have some paralysis in the legs, maybe some bowel bladder problems associated with that, and no feeling, the complete paralysis. And that's another thing that we have to talk about is the incomplete and the complete injuries. Incomplete injuries, people can feel some things from wherever the injury, below where the injury has occurred. And those who have complete injuries will not feel anything or have any kind of functioning below that area. You have some statistics that are in your packet. They're from the National Spinal Cord Injury Statistics statistical center, but I want to point out just a couple of those. It's estimated that there are 17,000 new cases in the United States each year of spinal cord injury. And that is not any of those that are impacted or die at the scene of the accident. Males are 80% more likely to get a spinal cord injury than females. And it's been said that it may be because part of the brain that affects common sense. Maybe just a little but usually we see people who are younger, and that's the ones that need the preventive medicine. From 16 to 30 is the age of that are impacted the most by spinal cord injury, and they happen through vehicle accidents. They can happen through falls, and they can happen through acts of violence. They can also happen when people dive into water that is too shallow, and that will also impact. So there are a variety of ways, and I've heard like millions of different ways how people have gotten their spinal cord injury, but the number one is car accidents, and as Melissa said, distracted driving is really key. So we need to make sure not only are we ourselves not doing the distracted driving, checking the cell phones, messing with radio, talking to the passengers, but also those who are younger, maybe those who are starting out in driving. There is a National Think First program that does prevention of brain and spinal cord injury, and that's one of the things that we talk about to them. We go to middle schools, we go to elementary schools, we go to high schools, and we talk to them about not driving distracted and that kind of thing. But the spinal cord injury is not just a statistic. It's not just a number. It's a person with faces, and they have to learn to adapt and overcome various challenges, and it's hard work. They go through rehabilitation to learn new ways of life. They go through changes with their family, possibly new living arrangements. Individuals with spinal cord injuries have to think about their skin getting wet, sweating. You know, they have to think about bowel and bladder issues because they cannot risk getting a pressure sore or a bladder infection. But they do it, and they do things that we may not even consider every day. So, but they work, they play, and thanks to things like the Husky waiver, community involvement, family and friends, they live productive lives also. So please share this information, especially about distracted driving. If you need any more information, please do not hesitate to call me. And that is all I have for today.
Thank you so much, appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we have a proclamation from the governor.
Yes, and moving along to the next agenda item, in the interest of time, I'm not going to actually read verbatim the proclamation that's in your visitors package. It's in your notebook. But again, the governor, and in this case, Governor Henry Masters, has issued a proclamation that last week, the week of September 10th through the 16th, as Direct Support Professional Recognition Week. And I think that the timing of this was particularly good in the sense of, you've heard a lot of examples today about how the direct care staff, the direct support professionals are really where the rubber hits the road to provide health, safety, and welfare for our individuals, particularly when we're in a disaster situation. And so I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the hard work the governing body last year, you guys established our top priority was to address some of the workforce needs and to increase the hiring rate, and the agency was successful in that. And so effective July 1st, we pushed that money out, and now our direct care support professionals across the service delivery system make a little less than $1 more than they did this time last year. And that's good, and we'll continue that effort with acknowledgement for everything that they do. But we want to recognize and appreciate the governor's proclamation for this.
Thank you very much. Okay, the hurricane update. Tom and David.
Well, as we heard earlier this morning, we recently had an unwelcome visit from Hurricane Irma, and the state of South Carolina, as well as our BHDD-OIDD service delivery system, sustained a good bit of damage and a lot of disruption. Now, fortunately, while we did sustain damage, it was nowhere near the amount of damage that was originally predicted to occur. Originally, you all will remember that the hurricane was slated to come right into, initially make landfall in South Carolina, but we were very fortunate in that regard. However, despite the fact that it wasn't as bad as it was a challenge to our system. And it also gave us the opportunity, like Commissioner Linnell mentioned earlier, to assess how did our system do? Were we prepared to respond to an emergency? And it gave not only Max Abilities of York an opportunity to evaluate how did they do and what could they do better, but all of our organizations have that opportunity, as well as BHDD-OIDD, and we will be conducting the same kind of postmortems to see, what went right, what didn't go so right, what can we do better in the future. Again, while the hurricane wasn't as bad as predicted, it did require some of our boards to evacuate to other sites, which is an extraordinarily disruptive experience. And the positive on that is that we had an enormous amount of collaboration. While it's very, very disruptive on the organization of the people that have to leave their homes, it's equally disruptive on the organization of the people that have to accommodate and shelter the individuals that are evacuating. And I was quite impressed at the way our providers stepped up to the plate and had no qualms about offering shelter to their peers that were in risk or at greater risk of the storm damage. So I think that is very much of a silver lining that came out of this. This has happened in the past, and again, I think we have got a wonderful sense of collaboration between all of our partners, and that really is something to celebrate. And speaking of celebration, I think as both Chairman Rodnell and Commissioner Thompson mentioned, we had a lot of heroes that came out of this, even though it wasn't one of the worst weather events that we've experienced. We had a lot of people that rose to the occasion and really did a wonderful job. And I think that really does give us an opportunity to see who really, who is going to stand out, who is going to be committed, who is going to be willing to experience a little bit of personal discomfort. And I think, again, we had some favorable outcomes in that regard. I think overall, the response to the storm was very favorable. While certainly there are some things that we could have done different, and we will make some changes in the future. I think overall the system as a whole did very, very well. I'm going to turn it over to Tom now to talk a little bit about the specifics of how the hurricane affected our system.
Tab 6 in your package gave just a brief outline of summary of the evacuations that took place and the potential cost factor related to any damages we have seen in the system. There were 10 providers that basically had to relocate. 3 of them evacuated to other providers. 2 went inland to hotels, and 5 providers moved in to other sites in their capacity and buildings inward in the upstate of South Carolina. Total of 184 consumers moved and 116 staff, total 300 people altogether were in some type of movement around. There were other ones that were on the edge of moving, but as the storm shifted and went more westwardly and went up the Florida path, those individual providers decided to remain in place. Very thankful, as been mentioned, for Burton Center for receiving Beaufort and
housing them for over 4 or 5 days, and I hear they had a great time, and Burke Center did great in getting them involved in community activities in the Greenwood area while they were there. Also, the Charles Lee Center for receiving Hampton DSN board for several days as they were relocated up to Spartanburg County. The damages been very minor. What we've been able to disclose so far, like $17,000. So it hasn't been that of a major storm, as David said, for its damages and cost impact. Irma shifted and went up through Florida, but there were some power outages, some flood damage that took place around our provider network and our regional centers as well. Thankful for the dedicated staff at the regional centers and community providers who prepared to maintain care to the consumers that they're entrusted with. Did a great job. We worked with emergency management division as power was going out in different places around the state to get concentrated effort of utility companies to move in and put priority on those facilities, and it did work through EMD's ability to work with Duke Energy or South Carolina Electric and Gas or some co-op. They were able to prioritize those buildings that were without power for our consumers that were living there, and we got power back as quick as they could as they identified and prioritized those houses and day program buildings throughout our system. Things we did learn, we need more cots. We have a couple of, 150 cots in our system right now, staged at different regional centers. We're going to be hopefully purchasing more cots. They're accessible cots that are adapted for special needs population. So we'll be purchasing that down the road. We need to work with the utility companies to prioritize facilities within our system so they know when the power does go out, which ones they need to prioritize. We need to concentrate on the day program buildings so that we can get those up and going quickly so that they can relocate. If we have isolated homes out, that we do have the ability to get the day program available so that people can go there for large groups. And we need reliable transportation to pull our mobile generators that are at station at 4 of our campuses. Make sure we got ability to move those generators around where we need them. So overall, it was a positive outcome. We worked hard throughout our system to make sure the consumers were taken care of during that storm, and gladly it didn't come as directly as we thought. Thank good that Maria is moving out to the East Coast and out to the sea as well as we watch that storm out in the Atlantic right now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yes. Yes.
A couple of quick questions. We dodged a major bullet. Yes, sir. We dodged a major bullet with Harvey. We dodged a bullet really. We got hit pretty good with Matthew a couple years ago. We're dodging the bullet with Maria. You know, the thing that concerns me the most is when I read the national news and I see things that happen, and I see 8 people dying in a nursing home in Florida because of no air conditioning and because of no power. Then I hear we've got houses out in Oconee with no power. And we've been harping on this. We've been beating on this. I mean, and you just mentioned we got to have these mobile generators so we can go from one place to another. When are we going to ensure that our consumers all will have generators? Is that ever going to happen in every residential property that we oversee?
I don't think we could generate up 1,000 buildings in our system. That would be a major task.
Okay, so what about if you cluster them?
Right, and that's what we're doing. We're doing with day programs. We're bringing up power in day programs through the FEMA grant that we've mentioned several times.
How long will it take for us to be covered? When I say us, our consumers, so that we don't have 8 people die of no air conditioning in any one of our overseen residential communities, is what I'm mostly concerned with. We got the day programs. We can evacuate to day programs, I would think, to some extent. When will we be at that point where I don't have to worry about picking up a paper and seeing that happening to us? That was very, 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 I mean, it struck to the core when I read that. Right? It just is, and that's my concern. And when I say we dodged bullets, we've done a great job. Everybody's done great work, yeoman's work, but we've still dodged a bullet that we haven't had anything dramatic happen yet. And that's my question, because to me, that
what happened to those seniors in that nursing home is unconscionable.
Right.
So, especially in a private nursing home. Okay, now we have private providers, we have other providers. How do we cover that? And do we have that plan in place so that, i.e., 8 people from these 6 homes, or whatever, 4 people from these 12 homes, immediately are evacuated to a place that has air conditioning?
Right.
Do we have that plan in place?
We're working on it. We're, have the FEMA grant that's helping us get to that point. And we're concentrating on the large facilities, to get those geared up so they can have auxiliary power. Of course, the regional centers, we're very able to withstand, that condition if something goes out there, generate power to all 5 campuses on those campuses. We're working to get there. It's going to take a lot more money than we got currently put aside to do that. We've got 14 in the works. We need money to do another 9 that were part of that original package that we submitted to FEMA. And then we need more on top of that. We're going to try to do 1 in each geographical location around the state.
So again, what's your best guess how we can do it? What can we do as commission members to try to push these things along, to make this federal money come in? I don't even know if there is anything we can do, but the bottom line is that's going to come. I'm telling you, it's going to come crashing sooner or later. I mean, it's going to come crashing, and I don't want to be the one sitting on the sideline saying I should have, could have done this. So what can we do? We have that plan in writing? Do we have a time frame and expenditures over the time frame short of what our capital improvement stuff is? Because I don't know, and I'm asking questions. I don't know, and I'd like to know.
When we went for the FEMA grant back in 14, 15, we sent out our solicitation to all the providers and asked them who wanted to participate in this particular grant application. And we got back 26, 27 potential applicants that wanted to proceed on. So I guess we need to concentrate on those and get those done. And then we need to identify the remaining ones in pockets of the state that don't have a generator power in large facilities.
When you say applicants, you're referring to providers.
Providers.
Right. So who would want a generator?
Who would want?
Who would not want a generator?
It just takes some maintenance and takes some upkeep of it and all that. So
should that not be a requirement? You just stunned me. That comment just stunned me.
Well, I think some parts
there are
of the
providers
state
out there that don't want a generator.
Some parts are at greater risk. Some parts of the state are at greater risk than others.
I understand that, but we're at greater risk than anybody else.
I know.
Commissioner Dennison, to your comment, I think, we have the FEMA grant plan and that order and the money associated with that. There's another that is the capital improvement. If you want us to look at kind of map out the entire state and go, this is who has one, this is who's in the pipeline to have one in the time frame, and this is who's left, and this will, I think we can work that up and present that back because we don't have it packaged that way right
That's
now.
exactly
So the
what I'd
question
like
that you're
when
asking, I
somebody
think we
has
can
time to
answer
do it.
that
It's
at a
not-
subsequent meeting.
But I would love to be able to have that, so I know we know when those storms come through, where we're at risk. That's all. I don't mean to be that, it's concerns me.
All right, Susan, while you walk up there, I'm gonna answer some of your questions, so you take the second thing that you want to talk about, okay? The waiting list, which, I hop on daily. We still have about 81, and if y'all have any questions on the waiting list, you can ask us, but I just want to say we still have 8,100 people on the waiting list, and we still have 123 on the critical needs. Does anybody have any questions? All right, go on to your next one.
Would you mind if I say one thing that is?
As long as you don't ask, just say it.
Perhaps two sentences. Next month, we'd like to provide an update to the commission because, as you recall, back in June, we had approval for option 4 of the scenario to convert the community support slots into ID slots to move forward. As of the data collection point here, we were at 547 of the 600 ID slots that went with that option 4. So next month, we'll need to update you and talk about what to do next. Okay?
All right, intake update, eligibility, directive additions.
Sure. I'll just say that as we go through this, I'll try to move as quickly as possible, given the hour. But as questions get asked, I might call on Pat Bailey, who's also done some analysis with this and worked through this project as a project manager. So first of all, in your binders, you have a pre-submitted report that really reflects our process when we develop a new process internally of assessing what needs to be done, developing a plan to do it, implementing it, and then assessing and repeating all over again. So this document that looks like this one at sort of the back of that section that you got last week really tries to go through that and just give you a little bit of a view of some of the developments that we've had. So a couple quick highlights there is, we're very interested in the customer experience. We're looking at, and we've done some preliminary development of a customer satisfaction survey. We're looking at the effectiveness of our self-serve online screening tool that's in place. We've got some thoughts about that, and it's really effective for people who have records, but for people who need to talk to a person, they still have to talk to a person anyway after they've gone through that process. And then you'll see through our discussion in just a moment that we are also seeking approval for a $25 payment for referrals that go to intake providers, but for no fault of their own have to be terminated. For instance, when an individual decides they don't want to go through an eligibility process anymore, or if they just can't be contacted. And unfortunately, there's a certain percentage of our folks that just can't be contacted. Those are some highlights for that document. So what I'd like to do is just very quickly preview for you what we put in your binders today that certainly you can study at a later time, and I'd be glad to answer any questions about that next month or at any point in between. We looked at our data collection systems. We've been, as I said, we've got that repeating cycle of developing, implementing, and assessing. And so we really felt like our July sample data collection tool that we were using was the best for us to report on with the data today, because we felt like it was a month that was just as representative as any other month, but we had that best data with a new data system. So that allows analyzing all of the referrals in the month of July that came into our intake system, allows us to also give those cases some time to kind of go through the process between the beginning of July and then the middle of August. So that's where we were with those. We had 264 total, 264 total cases referred in July, and then you saw the split there of early intervention, is early intervention, and then 159 non-early intervention cases. So again, those early intervention cases are paid if it's done by a qualified intake provider at $25, and it's $175 for the non-EI cases. So then we have, you can go to the next slide, thank you. The EI intake cases, you'll see we had about 105 of those in the month of July, averaging about. So the actual technical aspects of the service are the same. For instance, you must do functional assessment of behavior. You must have you must do training for staff. All those pieces of the service are exactly the same. Who does the quality assurance process has just changed. So DDSN has done it through one sort of quality assurance unit, and now we're moving it to our other quality assurance unit. So as the residential habilitation services are being reviewed with their contract compliance, this sort of the technical features of this service will be part of that review instead. So we've just moved it from one review to the other, but it's really very similar.
Okay, last one. Yes. Quick question.
Yes.
I'm assuming we're trying to increase the pool of not providers, but to do the behavioral.
Yes.
That's the key here.
Yes.
Okay, now I'm going to go on a limb here, and I'm going to say, isn't that what Dr. LeGray got up and spoke about earlier today? He's in behavioral support provider limbo, basically where he's at. My question is, and before that, a month ago, it was Dr. Go, maybe Han Go. I don't recall whether he was in limbo or not, but I'm assuming he was.
I don't want a specific answer, but we are going to address that after this. You are going to address that after this meeting is over, correct?
Sure.
Why, my question is, why are they in limbo? Why, and I'm not speaking specifically about him. There'll be a lot of technical issues involved there, which I'm not privy to, probably wouldn't understand if you told me.
Sure.
But clearly, he's getting conflicting information, and this is a priority. We've been fighting this since we said, no, we're not taking it. Clearly, there's a disconnect somewhere, and I'm not smart enough to know where it is, and I'm not in that every day, so I don't know where it is. But something's disconnected. We've got two guys in the last 2 months who want to provide this service, and for some reason, it's not happening. They may not be qualified. Then they should be told they're not qualified. See you later, go on your merry way. I don't think that's the case. But if that is the case, we need to stop the dance. And again, we're circling.
Sure.
So I would personally like to have an answer to this situation privately.
Sure.
But I would also, the bigger situation is for maybe we discuss this at length at another meeting.
Sure.
Where that disconnect is.
Sure.
And again, it's just personal. I mean, we're trying to provide a service here, and we're trying to do it right, but yet it's just not moving at the pace that I like it to move at.
I understand.
Let me ask one question related to that. Before we moved it, right?
Moved what?
We moved you've got the work of the person providing intensive behavioral interventions will directly impact the score of the residential beneficiary.
Yes.
Was it doing that before?
No.
So a lot of what we're hearing about is that impact and potential financial repercussions.
Yes.
So when we moved it, why did we move it again?
We moved how we do the reviews and where the score goes, the impact of the scores. So we embedded that because this part of the service for people who receive residential habilitation is now part of the residential habilitation standards. So therefore, it's part of how the contract compliance reviews happen for residential habilitation. So if you're Oconee board, you have folks that receive residential habilitation, this service is provided for those people. So it should be well integrated, it should be monitored, it should have outcomes, it should be effective. It's really a quality issue. So embedding it within how those scores are reflected and how that's reviewed and reviewed more frequently, that's part of an improvement that I can talk to you about privately. That's actually a move so that we can relax the qualifications a little bit. And it also is a move towards increasing quality of our programs. I mean, it's disturbing to me to think that providers were paying people for a service and they weren't monitoring what was happening.
But the effect of that move is what we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, because it increases their awareness of what's happening with the quality of the residential habilitation service.
But it certainly has created
Sure.
other problems. So
yeah,
we do need to go back. I know, Bill, it's the world gone mad. I agree with you.
Next year.
Finished? Okay.
Unless there's
Any
another
other
question.
No other questions.
All right. David. Okay.
As Chairman Ravenel mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of people on our critical needs list. And those folks are waiting for residential services. And we've been struggling for a long time trying to come up with ways to deal with that. And you all got a summary of a couple of options that might be available to at least start whittling away at some of those folks on the critical list that have got significant behavioral needs. The refresher basically, there's a possibility of looking at opening one of our closed dorms at one of our regional centers back up and expanding the capacity of folks in the regional center by about 6 people. Also have the possibility of getting with one of the community providers that has demonstrated an ability and a willingness to serve folks that have got significant behavioral needs. And there are pros and cons to each of those options. I think one thing that I will point out is that for either one of those options, it's going to cost. Sorry.
Can we do both? Why do we have an option? I like both.
Well, and my caveat kind of speaks to that, and that is money. We did not get any new money to do residential expansion, so we would have to figure out a way to divert money that we've already got committed to some other areas to take care of this sort of expansion, which is there are risks at looking at that possibility.
I need to make a motion one way or the other.
Yeah,
I don't have any questions.
Just one comment. We have vacancies throughout the state, and on. It looks like there would be a way for us to encourage those people with vacancies. And one way we could do that is by properly funding what they need in order to take care of those people. And I don't see that. Is that an option for us? It's not.
Well, I mean, we do work with providers, and we offer heightened funding levels if they want to serve individuals that have got significant behavioral needs. Many providers are unwilling to do that because of the risk that they perceive associated with serving with somebody that's got a significant behavioral need. I think there's also concerns about compatibility with the other individuals that they might be living with.
Right. But they are in situations where it would be very, very difficult to get a band rate change. And therefore, those people have been actually returned to the regional centers. And actually, if we were more prompt and open to maintain them where they are financially, that is another option that certainly exists. And I think a lot of times providers have asked for that and they haven't gotten it. I think we both know that's true. So I think we have to look at where are the resources. There are vacancies everywhere, you know, and I'm not saying take it away from the providers. I'm saying go to them and ask them what it would take and see if you can't do it. I just think that's option 4. How many are there?
2.
2, trouble counting.
So
3.
She's like,
6.
so are you looking for a motion for?
No, this was, you all remember that there was a request that we.
Well, no, we are looking for, because if it's within the community, we have, and I hear what you're saying, when it comes to the specific designation of high management with that increased higher dollar amount, there are less providers than I can count on one hand that have said, hey, I'm interested in doing that. So if more providers are interested in doing that, we would be very, very open. There is a separate and parallel process of outliers, and we can have more conversations about that. But again, that is a different process than the high management. The vast majority of folks on the critical list meet that check mark for high management and need that level of service and accountability, because the accountability for that recently has evolved to be slightly different. And so with regards to that, we have very few providers that are interested in doing that. Even within the providers that do, and I'm saying this generically, not referring to any one provider, you know, we have to make sure that as they grow, we don't unintentionally create a problem. I mean, it is a stressor when a provider grows and grows really quickly. So we also, from an oversight and a management point of view, want to make sure that we're monitoring that appropriately and that somebody doesn't grow too far too fast and end up creating problems, you know, for that service delivery. So we watch that really carefully too. As far as the option of expanding the regional centers, that would mean redirecting funds that are currently in the pool, like you said, kind of that vacancy floating around, but that are in the pool of community capacity. There is no new funds for residential expansion this year. So you were talking about redirecting funds currently associated with community beds and community development to a regional center. I cannot, in good conscience, sit in front of you guys and advise that. That is against every national trend. That is against every, you know, almost half the states don't even have regional centers anymore. I am a firm believer that our regional centers provide excellent care and do good work. And as long as we have them, I golly, we need to make sure that they're run well and they provide good services. But that is different than going into an expansion mode. I would not be doing my job if I did not advise you guys that that's against every national trend and every what's considered best practice nationally.
And as was noted in the paper that was in your packet, the United States Department of Justice has taken action against several states based upon the number of individuals that they're serving in public ICFs like other regional centers. So there is a legal risk there too.
Can you bring a proposal back to, about the vacancies and ways that we might want to provide to use some of those resources?
Sure.
Thank you very much. Tom?
Thank you, David.
And I'm gonna do the same thing to you. Does anybody have any questions about the financial update?
11.
Yeah.
If they don't have any questions.
If you don't have any questions, we'll go to the next one.
All right, tab 12 is the next one.
Yep.
It's the ICF comparison.
Anybody have any questions about that? Because if you don't have any questions,
Okay, so the question was, this goes back to the presentation we had last time, I believe.
It was the work session.
The work, about, you know, we put into the budget request something to try to equalize.
Yeah, 1.5 million we're asking to help us move ICF community resident costs up.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, let's assume for a second that request is treated similar to the request I think we had in the previous year, and the answer was no.
Right.
Besides throwing money at it, what else can we do to try to address that disparity? I'm trying to get to what's the source of the disparity for this commission to know about, and what can we, on both the short-term and long-term plans, do to address that disparity? Because it seems like it's a problem. Do you agree with that?
It is a problem.
Okay.
And we put money in there. This analysis here doesn't get to your point that you're making.
Okay.
The point that was brought up at the work session was the department was taking 30% of the dollars we were getting reimbursed from Medicaid and not allocating it or spending it back to the providers. And so what we did was take a trip to try to make that documentation was that correct or where was it? And we were asked to do that. So what the two analysis does, it does for the current year, it takes 2018, what we're currently getting from Medicaid to what we're paying our providers in 4 different bands that we pay them with, because we only have the boards do ICFs in the community. There's no private providers doing ICFs. And then also we took it back another year, went back to 17 and compared it to what we got paid for Medicaid for 17 to what we paid out our providers in those 4 band rates. And so it shows that in current year we're in 3.4% of the money is still remaining with DDSN. The other 96 point whatever percent is being used by the providers in dealing with their needs to provide ICF care in the community. In 2017, it's less than a point, less than a percentage point. What we are able to retain to what we gave to our provider network. So that was the question that was presented. Now, if you want us to.
Sorry, that was not my question. I think that was
Yeah,
I jumped ahead.
Okay.
While we're still on that question, some of these rates, band rates, it is 40%. In other words, you've got some with huge disparity. So, you know, you're quoting the one that the band H is 4% on the band H, right?
No, I'm going to quote the combined of all 4 of those rates. We have it on page 3.
Don't combine them for a minute.
Okay, but
Some of them are, you've got band H, daily rate, July band H, and you've got 40.4%.
That's upside down though.
Yes, sir. We're paying out more than we're getting.
Oh, okay, you're negative 40%. All right, 28%, band G.
All right, we got 19 band Gs in our system for ICFs.
Now, here's the thing, on these that you're upside down in or whatever, on these, when you were figuring these new contract amounts, did that include the raises?
The raises, yeah, it's in there.
Okay, it's in there. Okay, but you're actually going to get paid retroactively, right?
No.
You don't get retroactively?
No, ma'am.
Will you ever get a rate adjustment?
Hopefully. It took us a whole year to get it for last year.
Okay.
We put it in at the beginning. You're dealing with Medicaid, you're dealing with a lot of different complexities, a lot of different things you got to play into it. We paid it out. It took us a year to get the money that covered those dollars that we gave them in 17, that they being the provider. Same thing here. We already given the rate out
extra money in there for the ICS. We do not have it in our current.
No, but you will.
But whenever it does, it's going to be be prospective from that point on. It will not go back.
Okay, but it won't look like this, which is why I asked for June. And where's the one I asked for in June?
The second part of the packet. To
Okay.
use last year as an example, we passed on the pay raises effective July 1st. Because, what Tom was talking about, it takes a while, lots of wheels and gears with Medicaid. It was May, correct? That Medicaid adjusted the rate, and it was only for May forward.
July.
So, I mean,
July.
So July.
July's
Okay, so they
17th.
adjusted in May, so we basically ate that.
Right.
As, an operational unit, as, we ate that percentage that was passed on in advance. So we paid basically 100% state dollars for that, and because the Medicaid rate was not changed effectively until a year later. The same thing will probably happen this year because, it takes, it's a process, federal government, state government, and it'll probably be a year later, and it's not retrospective. It's from that point moving forward. So it usually takes a year to quote unquote catch up.
Okay, but some of these percents, that like 28%, are the issue. I think those, we're taking a whole lot off out of those people. And all I'm saying is, those are the people that are hurting the most.
Those band Gs, they're the less needy people in the ICF beds. If there was a higher need, we would have already adjusted their needs to help them move theirs up. We've done that with several placements where Gs were in place and they needed more dollars, we moved them over band H. But if they're Gs, there's been no need for increased rate adjustment for them.
These are all community rates. These are not
Right.
institutional rates.
Right.
Okay, so it's much higher when you move somebody in the community. They're not getting nearly as much to serve that same person. And when we take money away from some of these bands, like to this percent, these are the providers that are complaining that they've got to take money out of their day program to make ends meet in an ICF. So the whole rate issue of the ICF needs to be looked at because there is.
That's what we've been doing the last couple of years, like Commissioner LaMelle said. We've got to request him last year, this year, to increase the ICF. And we could do it a different way. We know their providers are making money off the CRCS. Yes, ma'am. And they will tell you they're making money off of it. We could adjust it and take the CRCS overages and put it to the ICS. We met on that about a year ago, decided that was not a fair way to do it. You'd have losers in that process. So the only way to do it is to influx some additional money. And that's what we've been asking for the General Assembly to help us correct this issue with the expenditures that the providers are receiving in the community, what we have available to pay them. And as you can see, we're paying out 97% of the money we get, we're paying it back out to the providers. We're not making any money, not the 30% that was quoted.
It's $1.5 million, so.
That's 3 point something percent.
Yeah, maybe we should put, I don't know, what is in capital improvement money that we don't spend. There are other ways to generate that $1.5 million if the General Assembly doesn't have it. I think we need to look at that. I think that's what the point of this was. So that they won't have to rob for Peter to pay Paul. So that those consumers in whatever county it is we're taking 28% out of is not gonna have to make it up some other way.
Yeah, I still think there's a fundamental misunderstanding.
Yeah, I don't understand what you're saying.
These reports, I mean, whether you like the band system, that we'll just leave that alone for a second, but the way it exists right now is, it is an average aggregate per member per month. And so right now, Medicaid pays us, and we've got this rate on here, what gets paid. In some of the cases, that is less than what, we pay the provider less than Medicaid pays us. In some of the cases, we pay the provider more than Medicaid pays us. And that's what each one of these, there are 4 different versions, Band G, Band R, Band H with an outlier. And what is on the 3rd page of each one of these 2 handouts is when you put all 4 of those together, the ones that are more, the ones that are less, and you do the math, the difference between what we receive from Medicaid and what we pay out last year was less than 1%. This year, it's expected to be, based on those numbers and those projections, 3.4%.
Yeah, I
If you look at,
think that's the problem. We're putting it all together. And when it's bad, it's bad. You know, we're lumping it all together. You
There's
have
only-
different band rates.
There's 494 people in the community to get ICF certified.